Okay, are we ready to start? I'd like to call this Lincoln City Council budget discussion meeting for Thursday, July 16th, 2020 to order. As this is an open meeting, so we have the Opens Meetings Act posted in the back of the room, if anybody would care to read it. And we will go forward today. We will not be having any testimony. It's just a discussion amongst the city council members. And if we have questions for staff, we're going to call them up and we'll go forward with that. We have one other item of business. Roy?
At the request of the city attorney, we need some clarification on an action item that we did on Monday. And that is, it was not clear in the record that we had actually delayed item 11B along with 11A. So I'm going to move now that we do that. We delay item 11B to correspond with item 11A from last week.
I think you want to bring forward.
Yeah, bring forward from the pending list.
Oh, okay.
Put it on the agenda.
Oh, that's right.
for-
Bring forward with it. Sorry. Yes. So it's on. They're both on the agenda for hearing and action on the 20th.
Could you read them?
That
you
is
tell us what
the
the
appeal
title
of
is?
denial for deviation for Hannon Place condominium unit.
For two items. And we only
Number
brought
two.
one on.
We had moved and brought forward. Let's see, which number is it?
Pending item number, or A, 11A?
Yeah,
11A.
11A.
And just for those of people that don't have their agenda in front, this was an item that was originally heard way last fall.
Yes.
And Post represented the applicants. Two items were linked. It's been on pending forever. She made the request of the council to take it off of pending and put it for hearing on next Monday. We wanted to make sure we had both the items on the agenda
Right.
at the same time.
So,
Okay.
So is it a public
Okay.
hearing on Monday?
yes.
We need a motion.
Public hearing and voting. It's a resolution. So it's coming off of pending. So I'm moving that.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we also clarify that it meant 11A and B, correct? On the
And
agenda, and we'll be bringing both of those forward for our meeting on Monday.
who second?
Tammy, Councilperson Ward.
Thank you.
Do we have any other discussions? Are
I
you?
have a question.
Yes.
So 11B is the Hoy Prairie South LLC, correct? But then
Let me look
there's,
11, okay.
so I'm,
This is a, let me get this right here.
It may be
11A.
talking about 11B and C, because you might have different agendas if you talk about the
Yeah, 11B
name
is,
of the number. for
is
the
item
budget.
19R-161, appeal of denial of request for deviation for Hannon Place condominium unit number 2, located approximately 66th and Pine Lake Road, which is connected to 19R-160, which is the appeal by Ann Post on behalf of Vic and Kathleen Hannon on the Planning Commission's denial of their special permit to develop a community unit plan.
So, did that answer your question, Jane?
kind of, I'm looking on the July 20th agenda, but I don't see.
No, we're looking at this last week's
I
agenda.
understand, and I'm looking at the action that Sony had taken from last week,
So-
and I see item 11A is still on pending, but I don't know where the other item that you quoted went.
Item, just for clarification, because if you're looking at the agenda for Monday, the 20th,
Uh-huh.
the first item that we moved off of pending is actually item 4A on the 20th agenda. That's bill number 19R-160. The appeal by Ann Post on behalf of Vic and Kathleen Hannon. And what we're requesting now is the item that you still see on the agenda, which is the pending item
Got it.
10A,
19R.
which we're requesting to move on to that agenda.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now it's clear.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? Please call the roll.
Washington,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Raybold,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
McGinnis. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Shope. Is Shope not here today?
No.
Okay, McGinnis,
Yes.
motion carried 6-0.
Okay, now we can move on to the items that we have for today. We have, Brandon, would you like to come forward? And we have one item, right?
Yes. I've got paper copies here.
Go.
Before we step into that, do you want me to walk through the schedule real quick, just so
Yeah,
we all
please.
know where we're? Okay, so all the proposed changes were submitted. We received one of those. We have the discussion today now, and then on Thursday, on the 16th, on Monday, July 20th at 1 p.m., you're going to vote on this one proposal that you have before you that's been submitted. The mayor has until July 22nd for the charter to make any changes to her proposed base. I think she announced some of those last Friday that you're all aware of. And then from there, we have a publication requirement we got to make, but then August 3rd is the public hearing. That starts at 3 p.m. with a break at 6 p.m. and then resuming till 6:30 and then going till 10:30 that night. Any final proposals after you hear the public's testimony? Final proposals are due to budget by 3 p.m. on August 7th. And then on August 10th, we have another round of this where you have a discussion at 1 p.m. on August 10th. And then August 12th at 3 p.m., which is a Wednesday, you have a final vote. And then that leads up to budget adoption night on the 24th. So hopefully all the changes, any changes that'll potentially be made will be made by the 12th of August that you're voting on. So that we have, it really helps on a budget adoption night to cut down on confusion so we're not making any type of last minute changes. Now, in between that, there is always a change that has to be made because on August 20th, we get valuations. So right now we have an estimated amount in there. It's like 2.49% increase in valuations. And then we get our final amount on August 20th. So there's always adjustments right at the end that are going to be made. And we try to get those to you as quick as possible. It just depends on when we get information from the assessor as well. So
Okay.
that's the schedule we got moving forward.
Any questions on the schedule? Yes.
That schedule's available online on our city council website.
If you go to finance and under budget on the 2021 tab, it's got the schedule posted online.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's on the council website
Okay.
also.
So if people
Okay.
wanted to find it, they just go to the city council website under meetings. It's biennial budget meeting, that link.
Okay.
So with that, I mean, we've got one proposal
Mhm.
that's been submitted. I can walk through that, or if,
Well, no,
Councilman.
go ahead and then I'll follow up.
okay. So this is a proposal, of course, I didn't keep a copy. So as you know, the mayor proposed as part of an adjustment to her pay base last Friday to decrease the general fund, or general revenues that are dedicated for street purposes out of the general fund, decrease that by 1.278 million, and then restore, I'm trying to bring up the proposal, things that were previously cut, so 500,000 to sidewalk capital improvement program, $400,000 to library hours, $290,000 to Parks and Recs capital improvement program, and then $88,000 to the urban development capital improvement program. And then in addition to that was the proposal to issue highway allocation bonds. Issuing any highway allocation bonds would be in addition to the budget process. The city council as a board would have to approve the issuance of those bonds.
Okay.
So we're working on that. Kind of finalized proposal is the change in the CIP numbers, and we'll be getting all of that to you soon as to what LTU would be expected to spend really within the first year of a 25 million bond. So we're working on that. We're going to get that to you very soon. So in regards to that, those changes, Councilmember McGinnis proposed utilizing $1.278 million of general fund balances, so our reserves, and then increasing the Transportation Street Preservation Capital Improvement Program by $1.278 million.
So my proposal is, probably most of you can understand, is that would like to take the money from the general fund and restore it back to streets where we were extracting the 1.2 million out of the streets prior to put into libraries and sidewalks and parks. So I'd like to keep that money in the street funds and then use general fund money for the libraries and for the sidewalks and for the parks. And where I got the idea on this is we have a self-imposed 20% rule on reserves. The city council does through an ordinance, which could be changed if needed, but it really hasn't had to been in the past. And we're over 21% at the current time. So 1% on a 180 million is $1.8 million that we are over the 20% reserve number. And I'm proposing to use those funds to put them into the libraries, into the sidewalks, into the parks, and then keep the streets whole without removing funds from the streets. And he has a rebuttal.
Well, I don't know if a rebuttal, but
Oh, okay.
more than anything, information to share. I just want to
Pass it up.
walk everybody through reserves, where we're currently at with reserves, where we're estimated to be at with reserves, and then kind of impact the upcoming budget as well. That pass around. So I'm going to talk about the current policy real quick, just so you're aware. So we have a current city council policy adopted in 2003. That's 20% of the ensuing general fund budget. So it's always.
Do you want to put this on the?
Oh yeah, I can put that up. Sorry. Yep. All right, I'm going to start at the kind of the second portion and walk back. Just so the current city council policy was adopted in 2003. So it's 20% of the ensuing budget so it's the upcoming year budget that it's the 20% of. Fund balance in excess of current unreserved funds, less 15% of budget projected out over 5 years may be allocated. And then any shortage from requirements of the policy should be built up through the budget process and then amortized over a 3-year period to get back to that 20%. Okay, so in the blue box at the top on the left, so at the end of 18-19, we had 44.6 million in undesignated kind of fund balances. So if you looked at the overall fund balance, it's more than that, but there's restricted portions that you can't touch for various reasons. So that doesn't count into this. So this is really only 2 parts of what's calculated in a total overall fund balance. So that was down by 8.7 million compared to the prior year for the general fund. So there are a couple things there. As a planned drawdown, and then also sales tax didn't meet expectations, which caused part of that drawdown. And then we get to 1920. So estimating to end the year with 37.68 million, that'd be down 6.9 million. So and you can see the percentages right under that. So that's 21.39% at 37.68 million. So that's a plan. Part of that was a planned drawdown. And then it was also all the impacts that we've had through COVID, sales tax, fee revenues that are lost, expenditures increases, a number of different reasons. Okay, so then if you move to 2021 based off of the budget that's been proposed, and you decide to take 1.3 million out of the reserves, then it just drops you a little bit below that 20% threshold. Now, since this is on the ensuing year budget, so which would be the 21-22, at this point we have estimated numbers for 21-22, but that's not an adopted budget by any means, and so that could adjust is what I'm trying to tell you.
So,
Yeah, go ahead, Roy.
So, I'm listening to the news, reading what's going on today, and today the state says their revenues for the last quarter are actually higher year over year than last year
Okay.
for the same quarter. Do we have any feel for what that is for us? I mean, it's just astounding news to me, but we did really well
Yeah.
as a state. Is the city usually mirror the state's revenues?
You would think to a certain standpoint, well, sales tax, obviously the state's going to get a portion, but, it's more specific to what's generated in Lincoln versus what's
Right.
generated across the whole state. So sales tax to date, we've had an 8% drop, a 14% drop, and then another 8% drop. So that would be for May, June, and July that we've received so far. So we know we're seeing significant decreases in sales tax there. So we've remained fairly conservative, I guess, on
Okay.
sales tax projections because there are a lot of unknowns.
And we
so-
still don't know what's going to be founded on 20th of August.
Yeah, and that's a big unknown. So property value, at this point, property valuations should be fairly set in stone because those were set in January. And then, we go through the informal appeal process and then the formal. So we should have pretty solid numbers on property valuations. And I don't think those right now are going to be impacted. We might have some increased delinquencies from people not paying property taxes, but the valuations should be fairly set at this point in time.
Well, I just want to comment on Roy's comment. I understood it that they hit the projections, that they didn't exceed the projections from before. And then Ernie Goss in his report just issued that we're still trending below, way below in the negative. We're not as negative as we were before, but we're still in the negative and certainly below neutral based on his survey to procurers and manufacturers in the Midwest. So I would say it's great to be optimistic, but I think we need to be very cautiously
Yeah, I was just
optimistic.
talking what I heard on the radio news about the state saying what they said about the state's revenues.
Yeah. So the revenues are across, like we've seen, drops in park and recreation fees. We've seen drops in sales tax, significant drops on the JPA side because
No
those
events.
occupation taxes are primarily centered on the hospitality industry, which has really been impacted by this, versus, sales tax. We've got areas that are performing a lot better than they were before. Like I know liquor store sales are up like 20% the first month. So some industries are doing a lot better. Some are struggling a lot.
Grocery stores. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So Brandon, could you talk about, so last year we approved to balance the budget, we approved $6 million from the reserves to balance the budget, or something like that. So we were new, so I'm trying to remember. Have we spent down more than that $6 million since that time, and what for?
So for 1920, I think there was a planned drawdown of about 2.2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And that was going to be to buy fire apparatus, matching donation for parks, improvements, capital improvements at the fire stations, some police body cameras and server upgrades, and vehicles for police. So that was a planned drawdown, and then and that was about 2.2 million. And then on top of that, we've had all these impacts from COVID that are really pushing our sales tax down at the end of the year. So this 6.9 million draw is basically an estimate, a fairly conservative estimate at this point at what we could potentially draw down in the current year. But 2.2 million of that was planned. The rest,
So you're saying, 4.5 or whatever
yeah.
is what we've overspent or spent beyond our income.
Or our revenues, yeah.
Yeah, we
Revenues not
spent more
mean-
than the income on it. But you're saying it's a fairly conservative estimate. It could be off $500,000. We're going to spend down by the end of the year is what you're trying to project up
yeah.
to the fiscal year, right?
Yes. Yeah, so it could be more than that.
Okay.
No, I'm hoping it won't be more.
I was going to
But it'll
say, you
definitely
said
be less.
conservative. I hope
Yeah,
you were going the
sorry.
other way.
But it's conservative on revenue or conservative on expenses?
Expenses.
I think it's conservative on revenue side.
Okay, so you're not really expecting to spend more than $6.9 million into reserves? The planned
No.
portion plus
Yeah,
what we see here.
yes,
So on the revenue side, we're still waiting to find out.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In addition, I think staff have done a great job to try to limit expenditures to necessary at this point in time. So all the departments have worked hard on that. We've kept open a number of positions as well, held off on some capital items. So we're doing everything that we can to balance that or try to get it closer.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to balance. I can guarantee you that for this year. So.
Okay.
Okay.
One more
No,
comment
that's
over here
good. It
by
was a question for you.
And then I might have a question following
Okay.
Councilwoman Rabel.
But Brandon has the mic.
Well, if there's more questions, okay. Okay, so why have reserves? Best practices, GF Government Finance Officers Association just recommends having a minimum of 2 months worth of reserves on hand. We have reserves to make up temporary shortfalls and cover unexpected shortfalls. Adequate level of reserves is a sign of creditworthiness, and maintaining cash for liquidity is really important, especially due to revenue timing. Since we get property taxes primarily 2 times throughout the year, it's good to have cash built up to hold us through the rest of the year before those property tax revenues come in. When to use excess reserves, we kind of talked through this in the last budget cycle, which is why there was some planned drawdown there. Is, one-time expenditures, debt reduction, establishing risk management programs, funding accrued liabilities, or increasing those reserves with the understanding that you're going to have a future drawdown. So you're putting away cash to draw it down for X project in the future. So the primary concern is really from a rating standpoint. And right now the the city council has a 20% policy. That's kind of in between S&P and Moody's of what they want for a AAA rated agency. So we are AAA rated from both agencies. Moody's is probably more on the conservative side, and then S&P. S&P wants a 15% minimum fund balance for a AAA, and Moody's wants a 30% fund balance for a AAA. So our policies are in between. We just talked to the rating agencies today as well on the bonds that are being sold for the refundings that the city council approved. And, their primary focuses, and one thing that we've been really good at so far is liquidity, and having cash on hand, not only in the general fund, but in other governmental funds that really boost us up. So from a rating perspective, if you just looked at Moody's methodology, they would peg us about a AA. So we're getting a 2-notch upgrade from Moody's for probably liquidity purposes and then also a stable economy. Standard & Poor's, I believe, if you looked at their rating methodology, we'd be about a AA+, and then we're getting a 1-notch upgrade from S&P to a AAA. And how their criteria works, so some of these things are within our control, some of them are not. So institutional framework is basically what does the boundaries of the state set for you, so that's the same across the board. And those are hard to change because of state laws, state constitution. The economy, another area that's hard to control. So that's a little bit out of our hands. You do have some ability to impact that through policies. Finances, so I'd say you have direct control over this. This is the outcomes of the budget, or if you have a balanced budget, if you're generating reserves or increasing reserves over time. Management is basically how you're managing your budget, and they've got indicators set up for all these. And then debt and pension, which a little bit harder to address because it takes so long to swing the pendulum on debt and pension issues. So getting to my point is, trends are important. Our strength of being a AAA rated agency is based off of a strong, diverse economy, and then also having cash available and liquidity for our governmental funds. So decreases in cash and decreases in cash on a regular basis ends up being negative trends to S&P and Moody's. They view that poorly from a management perspective and also just from a budgetary perspective. So what I'm telling you, if you make this a practice, it's going to show up in your ratings. And if having a AAA is a value or something that you want and desire for our community, which is a sign of our creditworthiness and gives us access to lower rates and interest on debt, then we need to get to a point where we're stopping utilizing reserves and reversing that course and starting to build up balances again. And I know, if you look at the chart, and it's a little bit different. Rating agencies treat the reserves a little bit different than how the city council's policy, so there's variations there. But what they're not going to want to see is this continued drawdown on fund balances, a percent of reserves, and then just another indicator that they use, that over time your fund balances are increasing. So these are things that they look at and they visit with us on an annual basis. So I guess that's my overall concern about drawing down on fund balances. will it have an impact on our rating? It looks like now that you would be doing this 3 years in a row, that there's a potential management practice built in that would look negatively on the city.
Okay. So you're saying that the past drawdowns done by the past councils and stuff affect us today, because if we draw down a third year in a row, so in the past, we've done drawdowns. There were planned drawdowns of 8 million, 7 million, or, in the past. And now we're asking for a drawdown of 1.3. You're saying if we go 3 years or 4 years with this, it's a bad deal.
I think if you do this on a continual practice and you just keep drawing down your reserves, while at the same time your expenditures on your budget go higher, yeah, I think they're going to look at that as a poor management practice.
Okay, well, two things on this. I wasn't aware that we were spending down our reserves as fast as we were. When we proposed this, that the planned drawdown wasn't the 6.9 million.
Yeah.
We only had a little smaller drawdown. So I was thinking for the 1.3 million, it'd be good to keep our services open, our libraries and such, that if we could, and I've always thought a reserve was for a rainy day fund when times were tight, which they are, and you've been using that money for that at this point, so.
Brandon, could you review what we used last year, for a big chunk of that drawdown, what it was for?
Yes, and do you have, so I know, I can tell you for 1920, the planned drawdown was $2.2 million. And that was used for, we purchased 7 fire trucks. We bought 5 police vehicles. We outfitted, I think, 1 team with body cameras, purchased servers that were needed for them. And then there was a match grant of $1 million for Parks and Recreation. And that was in total over the biennium. So the total of all that was more like 4.4 million over the biennium. Yeah.
Okay, I just seem to recall that it helped us improve the fleet of the fire trucks tremendously, because we were so far behind on the replenishment of some that were, I guess, old enough to drink and old enough to vote, so.
And at the same time, I think, leading into that, so there's the planned drawdown, then we had budget amounts of sales tax of 3.5 and 3.75. And then we came under those amounts. So that's what's part of the drawdown in 1819, and then we hit 1920, we have a planned drawdown, and then we have additional impacts due to COVID-19.
Okay, yes.
I have 2 questions, one for Brandon, one for the chair. So do the rating agencies care if there are planned drawdown or not?
So if you have excess of reserves and you go to them and say, hey, we're going to take this down for these purposes, and you communicate to that in advance, they typically won't knock you for doing something like that. And that's what we did through this last budget cycle. Like, hey, we're doing a planned drawdown, a couple million a year. But then we had economic issues on top of that. So, then we had to go back and say, hey, well, here's the issues we have, and here's our estimates of where we're going to be.
So I'm assuming then that we told them we were going to take the money out for fire trucks and cruisers. They were fine with that, but then the economic issue, then they start to look, oh, they didn't plan that.
Yeah. And
That's where they're starting to calculate, oh, how many years have they done unplanned drawdowns?
it's doing that, and your reserve levels are starting
And
to
the
go
reserves.
down.
So once we hit the 20% percent or what, I mean, I realize they each have, our goal was 20%. They have different levels
Yeah.
where they want us to be.
And likely, we would get more pressure from Moody's, either through a negative outlook or a potential downgrade, and than we would through S&P, because some of their requirements for fund balance are lower. Yeah.
And what effect would a lower rating with Moody's have on our bonds?
So it just goes back to credit worthiness.
Okay.
You know, it's a sign of, I think, somewhat prosperity in your community if you're a AAA rated agency. It means, you know, your budgets are on solid standing, you have a great economy. You know, it's a benchmark status. In addition to that, you get access to the best credit markets that are available. So when we go out and borrow money because we have a AAA, or our water utility is a AA plus, you know, we're going to get lower interest rates on the money that we're borrowing to do improvements in the community.
Okay. And my question for the chair.
Yeah.
On your proposal, does this, are you suggesting this by itself, or does this match up? Are you going to then say we don't need the bond? So you
No,
don't-
no, the bond is a separate issue.
Okay, I'm
It's
just trying
not
to make sure
anything to
that,
do with this,
okay, I just wanted to
with
make
this
certain
at
that
this point.
I understood. All right,
Administratively, so on the bond issue, so I think the mayor is adjusting the CIP to increase the amount of street work that can be done in year one. So that, if you voted on that and approved that, then that would give appropriations for them to do the work. But then there's a second action that has to occur, which is the city council voting on the highway obligation bond, or highway bonds, to pass those to approve the money. So there's kind of two actions: appropriations and then approval of the bond.
Okay? Yeah, so
Thank
that's a different issue.
Okay.
They're not tied together.
So your proposal does not get rid of the bond, it's just to draw out money from the general fund to add to LTU.
Right. It's to replace the money that we're extracting from LTU.
But aren't we, okay.
so
and-
you mean extracting from the mayor's original proposed budget?
Extracting from the city
Uh,
CIP fund, the general fund money that was gonna be that was in the original budget to be put into streets.
So the original budget had
7.5? 7.89?
1.785, and then this so this is still considered part of the mayor's propose. It decreased that 1.785 by 1.278.
2, 7,
Okay.
8, okay.
And then it shifted that to make sure the libraries stayed open, to 500,000 for sidewalks in the community, 290,000 for Parks and Rec capital improvement program, and then 88,000 for the urban development capital improvement program. So it restored those previously proposed cuts. And what Councilmember McGinnis is proposing is to then take out of the general fund reserves and then make the LTU street preservation money back whole again.
I guess I thought that's what we were going to do with the bond.
So
I understand separate issue, but I mean, I thought of doing the highway allocation bond was to bring some money back into, for multiple reasons, all the things you just mentioned, but also into streets.
overall, the total street money in the CIP would increase for the current year. And because, let's say if that number was 10 million, it increased by 10 million, but then it would decrease in the general fund by 1.278 million. unless this proposal was approved.
Okay.
So overall, money goes up, but there would be a little net decrease because of the proposed decrease by the mayor.
Okay. Yes, Ray?
Well, I think that I'm in favor of this because it is the wrong environment in which to be seen as reducing street funds after last year the citizens of Lincoln approved a 1/4-cent sales tax to increase street funds availability. And to be seen taking money out even through a leveraging process, I don't think is a good look for the city. I don't think it's the right message to send about our priorities on streets and what the citizens have been telling us about streets. So I think it's a good proposal, and it doesn't touch the idea that we're going to restore funding to libraries and sidewalks and those kind of things. It doesn't affect that at all. And in my opinion, a reserve is for difficult times, and these are difficult times. And again, we still don't know what it's going to look like for the rest of this year or next year. And I propose if we decide to do this, that we also resolve to, when we have the opportunity, earliest opportunity is to start putting money back into the reserve. So those are my thoughts on this.
Yes, Jane?
Richard, could you be so kind as to go over the elements that are being restored with your proposal?
Well, we would be restoring the 1.278, is that correct?
Yeah.
To the street funds that were taken out of street funds for the library, for the park, and for the sidewalks. And so we'd be restoring the 1.278 to the LTU, to the street funds that we've removed.
So can I, I'm going to try and clarify it for myself. The 1.278 that goes back into the budget for LTU for streets are not street funds. They're general funds that were allocated for streets.
For streets.
Thank you, because it's a different thing.
Yep.
And I don't want people to think that we were ever taking targeted, reserved street funds and putting them into other pots of money. We were taking funds that were general funds and using them on streets.
And this amount had been in the budget for years.
So it's fluctuated a lot over the years as the amount of capital funding that transportation utilities has received. But in this last budget cycle, there were a number of shifts that occurred that shifted operation type dollars out of the general fund, and then shifted CIP dollars into the general fund that we sent over to streets. So that was an effort. I'm sorry.
Got me confused on that one, but that's okay.
I'm still confused about it too. So, so more operation dollars were paid for out of the general fund and less CIP dollars in the previous budget. And I'm talking 2016 to 2018. And then in the 18 to 20 proposal, we shifted capital dollars into the general fund and shifted operations out. So it looked like there was a dramatic increase overall in capital dollars associated versus if you looked at it previously, there weren't capital associated primarily out of the general fund.
Okay.
I know that's really.
I understand.
Okay.
We can get into that later with LTU, but yes, Jane.
I just want to comment on Roy's. I think you're characterizing what the mayor's proposal is. It's not to take any funds from the street fund, but it's to supplant the general revenue funds for street with some of the savings that we'll get from the highway allocation bonds would supplant that so that the street budget stays whole and intact rather than taking from the street fund for.
I understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is, if it weren't for the bond funded by highway allocation funds, you would not be able to leverage those dollars. And so they are, in my opinion, transportation dollars. I won't call them dedicated street money, but we are leveraging money that is dedicated to transportation away from transportation.
But that's a pretty standard finance mechanism. It's no different what the Lincoln Public School Board does when
Well, I'm really
they
not, I'm not on their
retire.
board.
Any savings they get, they supplant it back in their general fund that may be used for the acquisition of tablets for students, or it can be used for this. It doesn't necessarily go towards the construction of new schools or the physical improvements to their plant. It's a standard financial mechanism that helps you either balance your budget better or make sure that, in this case, that you maintain the street funding as it has been proposed to handle all the things that we want to get done, and in fact, all the additional street improvements that we anticipate getting done. I think it's a different way of, I do feel like you were mischaracterizing how that financial mechanism works that many political subdivisions use in a very routine fashion.
Okay. Well, and I brought this forward, and I feel the same way as Roy, that when we asked our citizens to look at ways to raise money for streets, they looked at everything, and they came up with a sales tax proposal. Of course, they wanted more money than what we had. But when we went out and told them that we would keep the same amount of funds, we would not be extracting anything out of the street funds after we pass the sales tax, that money will all stay in there. This, to me, looks like we're removing money out of the street funds that we had planned, had budgeted at the first of the year, and it was consistent with the previous few years. That we were all putting this kind of money into the general fund money into the street fund. And it was something that I just feel like we should honor that by staying up on that and continue to keep the money in there instead of removing money out of the streets.
I would agree with Jane that I'm really nervous that the characterization of this is going to be not accurate, right? Like, I think that's what I'm concerned about, is that, we say like it's going to look like that we are taking money from roads and we're, making the budget smaller for roads, and I just don't think that that's accurate.
The budget will stay the same, but we're borrowing money to keep it the same.
No better
The
time to borrow.
amount of
That's
cash that we're
the
putting
mantra.
into it will be less. The amount of cash from our street funds and stuff, the only increase in the street funds will be from borrowed money, correct?
Well, this is,
Oh, now that's confusing.
The only increase in
Well-
the CIP budget will be from borrowed money.
I think one of the things in the past where these kind of meetings we're introducing and discussing, but there will be time now, between now and Monday, to discuss these things with staff and with each other.
I think this is what it's set up for right now, is to
Sure.
discuss it. The one thing I wanted to add is, the reserve funds. I just distinctly recall getting a lot of pushback from some organizations about doing exactly what we did with, purchasing additional police vehicles, purchasing a lot of fire apparatus to get us out of a deep lack of capital investment in these essential services. And so it's interesting to hear this different take this year, when in past years we've always been vilified to really dip into the reserve for some of the things that were suggested.
We may still be vilified.
Yeah.
Of course.
Let's leave the door open
Let's-
for
let's-
that.
And last time we did this, we weren't in the middle of a financial crisis like we are now. And to me, that's the whole purpose of this cash reserve, is for when we're in a financial crisis. We did not have a cash inflow crisis, which we do now.
I think
So-
it's clear that we are using some of our cash reserve because of the anticipated decrease in our sales tax revenue. And so
Sure.
that's precisely why we're going into our reserve to help bridge that big budget deficit that we see looming, not only for this year, I have to add, but also for next year, which could even be an uglier situation. So I don't like when people mischaracterize things, and I really do feel like that's exactly what you're doing, because we all made a commitment that we were going to keep and increase the amount of funding for our streets in the city. That was part of the quarter-cent sales tax, but it wasn't to supplant any of the current funding going towards our streets. It was supposed to be in addition to that. And that's the commitment that we've all made. And for you to say we're now backtracking on that commitment is entirely incorrect.
I
And so-
disagree with that assessment.
I
What
know.
I knew
we're
you
going
would.
to
Go on.
disagree, but what
Okay.
I'm going to say is,
I knew you
I
would.
think you're right on this idea that when it was discussed how much money we need for our streets, it was double what the proposal for sales tax was double. It was a half cent. And we need, it was a compromise to bring it down to a quarter cent. So the need for our street money has not decreased. It continues apace. And so by if we restore this $1.278 million, that's money that we can use to improve our streets, period.
I guess,
Yes.
Mr.
Sandra?
Chairman, thank you. Roy, you're right. There is a huge amount of need for street funding here in Lincoln. And there was a need that said a half a cent would be better than a quarter cent, but the public voted on a quarter cent. And that's what passed, and so that's what we have. I understand the commitment that was made that said the quarter cent money would not supplant other general funds that were being spent on streets. That's understood. I remember last fall saying, yes, we want to spend some of the revenue or excess reserves on other projects right now. And the public wasn't entirely happy with our going into cash reserves. But we said it was important, and we did that. So there are certainly reasons to go into cash reserves. I know that we have an economic situation right now that looks dire, not quite as dire as we thought it might look, but it doesn't look rosy. And so not only have we got the planned drawdown, we have an unplanned drawdown of $4 million on top of this. So, okay, next year, we're probably going to have to draw down for similar reasons. I understand that, and some of it will be planned and some of it will be unplanned. But where we are making decisions to take more money out of our reserves, I want to be careful. It's true, I think libraries are important. I think parks and trails are important. I want to see library hours restored. And I'm thrilled that there was some way to do that. And it is creative, and I understand it looks like we're shifting pots of money around. But I do want to be really careful in saying that the city has spent in years past general revenue money on streets. That doesn't make it street money. It means it's general revenue money that was spent on streets. So let's try to be clear about that. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. We've had to spend money. We've made those choices to spend money, general revenue on streets. There is always going to be a need for street funding.
Good comments, and I like that. Okay. Well, we'll go forward, and if you need any more information on this and explanation?
I think I have a question. So, is there a difference between streets that are repaired and rehabbed compared to construction of new streets in the city? Because I'm just kind of curious. Like, is there a way to
Identify the general fund money that
correct
is going
because
to
I know
repair or new?
Because I know that one of the concerns that people had about the quarter cent sales tax was that
Right.
the formula said there was no earmark for how much would go to repair, right? It was like
It was earmarked to how much would go towards new,
Right, and
minimum.
I know that a lot of folks that I talked to had concerns that they wanted all of that to go to repair and rehab.
Right.
And so,
The general revenue that is being removed out of the street funds was part of the transportation system preservation, part of their CIP. And that component is preservation of the transportation system assets, including program delivery, repair, rehabilitation, intersections, traffic signals, bridges, facilities, structures in the public right-of-way. Projects included concrete repairs, mill and overlay, surface treatment, signal structures, and equipment replacement, bridge and structure work, facility improvements, and other transportation preservation and rehabilitation efforts. So it was a transportation preservation and rehabilitation program that the money is being removed from.
And
Yes.
if I recall, the Transportation Preservation Program is not specific projects that are scheduled out. They're
Right.
small projects that come up over the course of the year.
Correct. They're usually the bigger projects and such. Out of the, there's a transportation system growth program, but that has no general revenues in it. And I can share this with you a little bit. There's other ones. So it's basically the system preservation is where the money will be removed from. Now, as far as the allocation bond, is that going only into the system preservation, or is it going into system growth, or is it going to be a mixture as such, or where is it going to go into the CIP? And that's a future meeting, I guess, with,
I think they have an answer.
I was looking for somebody to answer.
Well, I see Liz nodding her head, so I felt like
that's what I was watching her, Liz going,
But it might have been that Liz was nodding her head that you should
Yes.
come
I need to
forward.
excuse myself. I have someone, a
4:30,
constituent
okay.
I have to meet, so.
okay,
Thank
we'll be done after this. And this will be another meeting also, that we'll need to be talking about where this goes in the CIP.
Yeah.
And we have to vote on it at that point.
Yes, sorry, you did see my head nodding and shaking. Kind of going back, and Chair McGinnis is correct that the 1.785 is strictly in the preservation. That is for our existing infrastructure that we have, so it does not go to new growth. With the 25 million bond, what we are looking at is,
Gone now.
well, pretty much preservation as well. In part because new growth projects take so much more time and to get through the system. And with bonds, we only have a specific period of time that we can spend the money in, and it's, I think, 3 years typically. Typically 3 years for that. And so most new growth projects take, to get them bid out, designed, and all of that, it takes longer than 3 years typically. So what we are looking at is, and these are general, I have our asset management and performance innovation group working on a prioritization list of areas. We're looking at seeing projects in every quadrant of the city, so we are representing everybody throughout the city. We're looking at intersection improvements, and that could be converting signals to roundabout, rebuilding age signals, adding new signals, adding turn lanes, those types of projects. Arterial rehabs. We have several projects that are already programmed between Lincoln on the Move Fund and some federal funds that we have that we could maybe enhance and do more of. We also have residential rehab. We have a huge backlog of residential rehab that this really could go towards. And then we do have bridge rehab. We have 143 bridge-sized structures here. We have, I think it's 5 that really need attention right sooner rather than later. So we would be looking at those potential bridge rehabs as well. So that's where we're really focusing, or would be focusing, the 25 million bond if that is approved. A little quicker, a little easier to do, and we can make sure that we hit every quadrant of the city and get things done everywhere as much as possible. We always need more money, and so this will help.
Do you have,
I actually do for John.
Perfect.
okay. One quick thing and then supposed to be done here.
We're scheduled till 5. Let's
We're having so much fun, aren't we? I told you it was one item, 15 minutes, we're out of here.
Hey, I wonder if I can get them to switch over to the overhead.
4:30, they left.
See if the tablet shows up here. I was just gonna go back to the same thing Brandon did. Oh, there's the Zoom.
Did you have a question for John?
No,
John,
I
before
think
we-
I want to hear this first.
Well, okay.
Yeah, no, I'm just, and just to clarify what we were talking about before, we're talking about funds coming in, funds coming out, and overall funding totals. And so, just to kind of clarify what we're looking at here is, here's the original 1.785 in general revenue, which are all correct. The general revenue dollar doesn't know what it's going to be spent on until you finally vote on it and spend it. So it can be spent on anything. In the original proposal, there was 1.785. In this proposal, that would be reduced to $507,000. But the addition of a minimum of $5 million in highway allocation bonds then raises that overall total from $46 to $50 million. So everybody's kind of saying the same thing. Richard's absolutely accurate that that would draw that down, and he's interested in, don't want to speak for you, but in making, sorry.
She does. No.
Interested in making the $50.4 million higher yet. If you add back in the 1.2, then the 50.4 would go up to 51.6, let's say, for example. But the fact of the matter is, if you take out 1.285 here to restore these services down here, the 1.785 goes down to 507, but the overall total goes up because we're going to be adding a minimum of $5 million from highway allocation funding. And based on discussions we've had at the LTU, that number is going to be whatever they think they can get out the door, because we want to get projects out the door as fast as we can to beat inflation. That could be $8 million, that could be $10 million. So the overall funding goes up. I think the discussion is, how much do we want it to go up? And where do you want the funding to come from? That was
Did you have a question for John?
I think that actually answers it. So, okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Yes, did you have one?
I have a comment, if I may I? If
Yes,
I may?
please do.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, John. I just want to say I'm really glad for the discussion because, to Councilwoman Raybould's point, and everybody else's actually, I just want to say I think that messaging is really important at this juncture about this, and I'm glad, Chairman McGinnis, that you brought this forward so we could have this discussion, because I think that everybody on this council supports street improvements. I'm thinking, bottom line, we all want better streets, even though Councilman James Michael Bowers gets them in his district.
In his district?
No.
Yeah, they all go to his district.
Well, we
don't
know
they?
that, but I think we all.
Those are fighting words.
Yes, but I think we all want the same things, but it is how we talk about it. And I'll just say that over the weekend, I heard from constituents thinking that we were taking money from quarter cent, and we know that's not the case. So we have to really be careful how we talk about it, because we did promise the voters that we would not use Lincoln on the Move money. So I would just reiterate, messaging is really important, and what we talk about it and how we say it. But just to thank Chairman McGinnis for bringing this forward, because it is a good discussion piece. Chairman McGinnis, are you listening? And I think we probably talked about it.
You're thanking me.
Well, I know, that's why I want you to pay attention. So I think we just have to be mindful of what it does mean, what it doesn't mean. And I just wanted to say that, so thank you for your time.
Yeah, and part of the reason I brought this forward, and towards the very end, Director Kaufman kind of enlightened me a little more on where we were on the general fund, or on the reserve fund. And I was unaware of the unplanned drawdown of another $4 million at that time that we are at, and the idea of having real close to where we need to be right now in these times still bothers me a little bit on the drawdown on reserves. I'm like Jane, I've never been a real big fan of drawdown on reserves. The only thing I didn't like is that because of past council actions, of drawdowns. Now the rating agencies are looking at us, if we have to draw something now to reserves because of the times, then that will nick us. So we got to be careful moving forward, council people, that we got to keep a good eye on this. But a great discussion. Sandra, I really appreciated the way you kind of laid it out, and it was pretty straightforward and such. So I think it was just something we needed to talk about, I thought, and I'd still, of course, like to see the street funds from the general fund restored back to the streets. But at this point, we will look at these on Monday. And anything else?
I just want to say that, we always have to live with history, whether it's the history of council. We get what we get. I'm quoting a preschool teacher. We get what we get, and we don't throw a fit.
No, it was a good discussion by everybody, so I appreciate it. Thank you. We stand adjourned.